This tiger, just like us, is made up of billions and billions of cells, right? And we know we are not only made up of one type of cell, like we have eye cells, heart cells, hair cells, skin cells, any kind of cell, right? We have so many different types of cells. They're not all the same. Now, what about stem cells? What the heck are stem cells? Because maybe you've never heard of that. So stem cells are very, very, very important. They're more important than almost any other kind of cell. And it's funny because it's a cell that you don't hear of, like you probably haven't heard of even. So stem cells are formed like this. So we know to form life, what do we need? We need a sperm cell and an egg cell, right? You need the gamete or the sperm cell from your dad and then the egg cell from your mom. They will share DNA and that will ultimately form a cell, right? The first cell that you are made of. This cell will go on to divide and divide and divide to form eventually many, many, many cells that will make you a full-on organism made up of billions of cells, right? So let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. So remember, by the way, the female egg is not a real egg, right? It's really going to be a big, big cell called an egg cell. Now they will combine DNA and then will form this cell that is you. This cell, like I said, is going to divide and divide to form many cells. Now remember, these cells are not going to become the same cell at the end of the day. Not all of your cells are the same. Some of these cells will end up becoming eye cells, hair cells, skin cells, right? Any kind of cell, right? So at the end of the day, they have a choice. Some will become muscle, some will become brain, some will become blood cells. They have a choice. They don't all become the same thing. So let's label some things here. This cell that we form here is called a zygote. This is the very first cell that you're made of. Then it will divide and divide and divide to form identical cells, and this whole group of cells is called a blastocyst. Now, what are stem cells? I haven't gotten to that yet, right? Yes, I have. These are stem cells. These are stem cells. Stem cell, so what is a stem cell then? A stem cell is any kind of cell that has the potential to become any cell. All of these cells have the potential to become any cell. They can become a muscle cell, skin cell, any cell, right? They don't have a specific function yet, but they will in the future. They will become any kind of destined cell that they're supposed to. So that's what stem cells are. It's like a baby. A baby can become any kind of thing in the world. It can become an engineer, a scientist, a sports person, anything, right? So just like that, these cells have no function yet. The whole function is to decide what cell they want to become. So that's all that a stem cell really is. It's really amazing. So they're really very important. Now, the process of these stem cells becoming a specific cell is called differentiation. It's kind of like saying they're growing up, right? So a baby is going to grow up and decide what career it wants to do. That's kind of the same thing. We call this differentiation. The process of a stem cell deciding what it wants to become. That's differentiation. Now, this process is irreversible. So once a cell decides or becomes a specific kind of cell, like a muscle cell or nerve cell or blood cell, then it cannot undo that. That cannot be undone. It is irreversible. Once they become that muscle cell, there's no going back, okay? Once you leave the form of a stem cell, there's no going back. Now, why do we call this one embryonic stem cell? Because later, you'll see in this video, there are different types of stem cells. So in general, like I said, a stem cell is just any kind of cell that has the potential to become another cell. That's all that a stem cell is. We call this one embryonic stem cell because this is a stem cell that is formed during the embryonic stage. So the stage of a baby being formed. So this is not yet a baby, but it's going to become a baby. That's why we call it an embryonic stem cell, because these are stem cells present during the formation of a baby. That's what it is. Okay, there are other kinds of stem cells which we'll talk about later, but these are really, really important. Now you might ask me something interesting, or maybe you won't, but I'm going to bring it up anyways. So we know that this cell right here has DNA that was formed from the combination of the sperm from your dad and the egg from your mom, right? And it will divide by a process called mitosis. Again, you might learn about that later if you haven't learned about it yet. that means that each of these cells will have the same DNA, right? All of your cells in your body has the same DNA. So why do some of these cells decide to become other cells? Why don't they all end up as the same cell if they have the same DNA? Because your DNA is your instruction manual, like this book. It's the instructions telling you how to grow up, telling the cells what to do. So if they all have the same instructions or DNA, why do they become different cells? So this is not very important for you to understand right now, but I'm going to quickly outline it just for the sake of it's good to understand it right now. The reason why is because your instruction manual is huge. Your instruction manual tells you how to become anything, any kind of cell. So for example, each cell will not use the entire DNA. It will not use the entire instruction manual. So for example, this cell here may decide to only read the first 10 pages and become whatever the first 10 pages says. Maybe the first 10 pages says become a muscle cell. So maybe this cell will read only the first 10 pages and follow that and therefore become a muscle cell. Whereas this other group of cells may decide to skip to the end of the book and read the last few chapters and become a nerve cell. So even though they all have the same DNA, they don't all read and respond to the same parts of the DNA. Therefore, they become different, okay? So that's what you need to understand about stem cells. Now let's go a bit more detailed. This stuff I already said, but it's a good way for me to summarize it. Here we have a nice wanted page of stem cell. How do we find the stem cell? How can we find it? What's the reward? Okay. So a stem cell, like I said, is unspecialized, like a baby, can become anything in the future. Right now, it's nothing important, but it can become anything. It's very valuable. Unlike the other cells, because we know these muscle cells, once they're a muscle cell, they can't become anything else. They're stuck for life with the muscle cell, whereas these cells can choose anything. They divide repeatedly. So these are the 4 most important characteristics that you need to know. So they can divide repeatedly. That means they can divide and divide many more times than adult cells. Because these right here are adult cells, for example, and they are fully differentiated cells. They don't divide anymore as much because they will get old. Maybe they divide once or twice, but they will get old and die and then going to get replaced by another stem cell and so on, right? The old will die and the new stem cells will come in. So that's the main difference. Stem cells tend to divide repeatedly, whereas adult cells don't really divide. They divide maybe a little bit. Sometimes they don't divide at all, but compared to stem cells, it's much different. So they can differentiate, right? I said what that means. That means growing up, essentially, becoming, choosing the final pathway. And then lastly, this is one I didn't mention yet, which is not that important, honestly, but it's just part of the book, so I'm going to say it. Stem cells tend to look like this. They tend to have a really large nucleus compared to cytoplasm. So this cell that I put here actually doesn't look like a stem cell. So these cells I used here are normal, how a normal adult cell would look like. But a stem cell rather looks like this. They have a humongous nucleus compared to cytoplasm. Again, not that important to know about. It's just something that is a small part of the book. Okay, so let's go on a bit more because I remember how I said that there are different types of stem cells. So far, we've learned about embryonic stem cells, right? This right here, these are embryonic stem cells, the blastocysts, right? These group of cells can choose to become any cells. Now, there are one other cell, or 2 other stem cells that you need to know about. But again, they do the same thing, basically. So let's say a portion of these stem cells, these embryonic stem cells, decide on a pathway. So some of them are going to be like, I want to become a digestive system cell. So they decide that and they start specializing. But at this point, they're not exactly sure which digestive system stem cell they want to be. Like they're not sure if they want to be a stomach cell, esophagus, mouth, whatever. They don't know anything about that yet, but they have decided that they want to be a digestive system cell. So they've started specializing, but at this point, they still have the ability to choose which specific cell they want to be. So in a way, they are still stem cells, just like these. They are just slightly more specialized. So unlike these embryonic stem cells that can choose any pathway, these cannot choose any pathway anymore, but they can still decide on what specific cell they want to be of the system they chose. So we call these adult stem cells, whereas we call these, right, down here, embryonic stem cells. Now, there's another kind of stem cell called umbilical cord stem cell, which you don't need to know much about. You just need to know it exists, and you can find it in the umbilical cord of a developing baby. but they also have potential to become many kinds of cells, okay? Now, we have two more words we need to know. So we call, you know how I said that these embryonic stem cells can choose any pathway? We call this pluripotent. They have the pluripotent means a cell that has the ability to choose any pathway at all. It has infinite options. Whereas a cell like this one, the adult stem cell, which only has a limited pathway to choose from now, it's still a stem cell because it can choose, but it can't choose that much. So we call it multipotent. So pluripotent if you can choose many options, multipotent if you can choose few, okay? So now we get to the final bit, advantages and disadvantages of stem cells, because we have said so, we've introduced stem cells and I've said they're so important, and maybe you can see why already, but why? Like, make it clear, man. Why do we care about stem cells? Like, why are they useful? Why do we care about them compared to other cells? The main reason why is because of medicine, because they can replace damaged tissue. What do I mean by that? They can replace damaged tissue. So for example, this right here is a nerve cell. So it's the cell that makes up your brain, right? Your brain, the thinking, the making decisions and all that. Now, there are some diseases like Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis which cause your brain cells to die faster than normal. So you end up losing memory and being unable to do things anymore because your brain is slowly starting to deteriorate. That's what happens with older people who have this disease. Now, what else? What other diseases are there? There are diseases such as this one, Stargardt's disease. It's an eye disease where some of your eye cells start deteriorating and dying, which makes you start becoming blind. And then there's another disease called leukemia. This is a kind of cancer where, by the way, your bone marrow is a place where all your red blood cells are made. So your blood cells are made. Now, in leukemia, this is a kind of cancer where your bone marrow goes out of control and makes a lot of these blood cells. But by becoming out of control, they make them wrong. So they make blood cells, a lot of them, which you may think, oh, that's a good thing, but that's a bad thing because they make them wrong. It's like building a house, and you'd be like, oh, I built 20 houses and you only built one. But maybe you built 20 very bad houses and no one wants to buy it, whereas the other guy built one good house, but it's very good and someone wants to buy it. That's the same thing here. It's no point making many cells if you make them wrong. So, what am I getting at? Why are stem cells useful? Because stem cells, right, have the potential to become any cell. So scientists have found ways to inject these stem cells into the brain or into the eye or into the bone marrow to be able to replace all of these dying cells, because these cells are dying very fast. So if we can find a way to inject a bunch of stem cells in there, which can differentiate and become these neurons or these eye cells or these blood cells, then we can slow down the process. We can treat the process. Now, instead of this patient losing all of their memory instantly, it may take more time because now they have stem cells that can help form new brain cells and help their memory persist for longer, or help this person be able to see slightly better, right? Restore some vision. So that's why stem cells are so crucial and important in the future of science. They're going to help treat a lot of diseases like these where cells die very quickly. Now you ask me, okay, that sounds awesome. What's so bad about this? Like, what is possibly bad about this? To understand what's bad about this, you need to think about where stem cells come from. Where do they come from? They come from here, right? When your mom and your dad makes a baby, or makes this cell that's going to become a baby, if we take this stem cell, then there's going to be no baby. So that's the bad thing about this. There's ethical problems, because by taking those stem cells, we essentially kill a baby before it was made, right? Because that cell was able to become a full-on organism. Think about it. If your parents were making a kid for some reason, or somehow making a kid, and scientists decide to take that stem cell, then you would not exist. So that's the ethical issue. You destroy potential babies from being made, okay, for the sake of saving an older person's memory, right? Is that fair? See, that's the point. There's a lot of debate and things and arguments, right? Some people see it as being worth it because that person never existed, so you didn't technically take their life away. So in that way, you can save another person's life. So it's a real debate, right? That's the main problem now in this kind of field. Now, it is especially bad with embryonic stem cells, right? Because these become a full organism. There's not really as much of a disadvantage with umbilical cord and adult stem cells, because these are stem cells that exist in a organism that is already formed. For example, if you feel like it, you can donate stem cells right now. You can go to the hospital, and a doctor can take stem cells from you, and you'll survive, right? That way you can help somebody else, because the scientist will just take your adult stem cells and use them to treat another person. Or when you get born, you can decide to give your umbilical cord to the doctors, and they can use it to take some stem cells. So there are two types of stem cells, these two, that are not as ethically bad, right? They're not as ethically bad. But the problem with them compared to embryonic stem cells is that embryonic stem cells are what? They are pluripotent, so they can solve any problem. Whereas umbilical cord and adult stem cells are multipotent, so they can only solve certain problems. Like if you take a adult stem cell that is only digestive system, you can only solve a digestive system problem. So they are not as flexible, these two cells, compared to the embryonic stem cells. And also, they are not as numerous. Embryonic stem cells can be taken and become any kind of cell, and you can take a lot of them, right? So this is basically the argument of stem cells and why they're good and why they're bad. So just know this is super promising, seems to be a super promising field in the future to help treat diseases. That's it. That's all you really need to know about stem cells.